It was just after 10 when the knock came. 3 slow raps against the apartment door that cut clean through the hum of the old radiator and the faint music I had playing from my phone. I froze mid-step between the kitchen and the couch, my glass of wine halfway to my lips because I hadn't ordered food, wasn't expecting anyone, and had specifically booked this Airbnb for the promise of complete privacy in the listing. I set the glass down and walked to the door, my socked feet silent against the hardwood. Through the peephole, I saw him, tall, broad-shouldered, leaning slightly forward, like he was deciding whether to knock again. He had dark hair that curled just enough at the edges to catch the light from the hallway fixture, and a jawline that was all sharp lines softened by a faint shadow of stubble. My host. I recognized him from the profile photo on the booking page, only now, without the polite smile and collared shirt, he was in a fitted black t-shirt and jeans that sat low on his hips, making him look more like someone you'd see leaning on a bar than changing light bulbs for guests. I opened the door a crack. "Hey, everything okay?" He smiled, small, just one corner of his mouth lifting, but there was something in it that made my stomach dip. "Yeah, sorry to bother you this late," he said, voice low and warm, in a way that made the air between us feel different. "I just had a quick question. Do you have a minute?" I stepped back, opening the door wider. "Sure." He glanced past me into the apartment, then back at me, like he was weighing something. "This is going to sound weird," he started, "but I was wondering if you were the one playing music earlier, and if you might want some company." I blinked, caught between laughing and asking what exactly he meant, but the way he was looking at me, steady, unblinking, not nervous but not cocky, made it clear this wasn't just about music. I was playing something," I said slowly, "and company isn't off the table." That was when the spark hit, fast, quiet, like static jumping from one surface to another. His eyes softened, just enough to make my chest tighten. "I don't usually do this," he said, stepping inside as I moved back to let him in. "I keep things professional with guests, but for some reason I couldn't just stay upstairs tonight." The door clicked shut behind him, and the apartment suddenly felt warmer, smaller, like the walls had leaned in closer to listen. He stood just inside the doorway for a moment, his eyes sweeping the apartment like he was taking in more than the decor. I realized I was standing there barefoot, in joggers and a loose t-shirt, my hair still slightly damp from the shower I'd taken earlier, and suddenly it felt like too much and not enough at the same time. "You've done a great job making yourself at home," he said, glancing at the half-finished glass of wine on the coffee table, the blanket I'd tossed over the couch, the faint steam still curling from the mug in the kitchen sink. His tone wasn't judgmental, it was observational, like he was quietly cataloging pieces of me. I gave a small shrug. "That's the idea, right? Feels more like a place when you make it yours, even if it's just for a few days." He nodded slowly, then stepped further in, closing a little of the space between us without rushing it. I noticed the faint scent of his cologne, something warm, woody, with a trace of spice, and it felt almost unfair, the way it cut through the air like it belonged here. "I was upstairs earlier," he said, his voice still low, "and I kept catching parts of whatever you were playing. It made me curious." I tilted my head. "Curious enough to knock?" "Curious enough to see if the person behind the music was someone I might want to know better," he said simply, meeting my eyes in a way that made my chest tighten. I didn't answer right away. not because I didn't know what to say, but because the directness of it caught me off guard. So many people talk in circles, testing the water without ever stepping in. He just waded in like the temperature didn't scare him. You could have messaged me on the app, I pointed out, though my voice had lost its edge and slipped into something softer. He smiled faintly. I could have. But this way, I get to see the look on your face when you answer. There was a small pause then, the kind that feels like standing on the edge of something. I motioned toward the couch. Do you want to sit? Only if you join me, he said. We sat close, not touching, but close enough that the air between our arms felt warm. He asked about the song, about my trip here, about whether I traveled often, and each question felt less like an interview and more like he was following a thread, tugging gently to see where it led. When I glanced at the clock, I realized half an hour had passed and the music from my phone had long since stopped. The room was quiet now except for the low rhythm of our voices and the occasional sound of his hand brushing lightly against his jeans when he shifted. Small, barely there movements that drew my eyes more than they should have. And then, almost without thinking, I asked, "Is this still about the music?" He looked at me for a long second, and there was a flicker, something like amusement, but warmer. "Not anymore," he said. He didn't look away after saying it. His eyes stayed on mine, steady but searching, like he was quietly gauging just how far I'd let this go tonight. I could feel the air between us shifting, warmer, denser, as if the rest of the apartment had faded out and all that was left was this couch, this closeness, and the weight of what neither of us had said yet. Then what is it about now? I asked, my voice lower than I intended, because something about the way he was sitting, leaning slightly toward me, one arm stretched along the back of the couch, his knees angled just enough to narrow the space between us, made it impossible to keep my tone even. His lips twitched into the faintest smile, but his voice stayed serious. About the fact that when I met you at check-in, I told myself you were just another guest. And then I heard you down here, laughing to yourself, moving around like you already belonged here, and I started thinking maybe I wanted you to. That landed harder than it should have. It wasn't flirty exactly. It was honest, and it made something in my chest tighten. You don't usually knock on doors late at night then? I said, trying to keep it light, though my pulse was already racing. Only when I'm hoping the person on the other side might open it for more than small talk, he said, the corner of his mouth curling just enough to let me know he meant every word. The silence after that was short but heavy. I felt the shift before either of us moved, the quiet inhale, the slight turn of his body toward mine, the almost imperceptible way my own knees angled toward him in return, and then his hand brushed mine. Not clumsy, not a grab, just the back of his fingers grazing over mine, a whisper of contact that made the room feel too warm. I didn't move away, neither did he. I probably shouldn't be sitting here, he murmured, though his voice didn't sound like someone planning to leave. Then why are you? I asked. He let the question hang for a moment, then answered simply, because I wanted to see what would happen if I did. His hand turned, fingers threading loosely with mine, and the simple act of holding hands, so easy, so casual in any other context, felt weighted with all the things we hadn't said yet. We sat like that for another minute, our hands linked, the space between our faces closing in, inch by inch, without either of us making the obvious move. The tension didn't break. It coiled tighter and tighter until I realized I was leaning forward before I even decided to. And just as my lips were about to brush his, there was a sound, soft but sharp enough to snap us back. The hum of the radiator sputtered loudly, a burst of heat clicking through the pipes like an uninvited guest, reminding us we weren't in some bubble outside of time. We both laughed quietly, the sound easing the moment just enough to make the next one inevitable. "Do you want me to leave?" he asked suddenly, his thumb brushing the side of my hand in slow, deliberate circles. I shook my head. "Number, I want to know what happens if you stay." The way he looked at me then told me we were past the point of pretending this was just a friendly conversation. He didn't break eye contact after I said it. His fingers were still curled loosely around mine, his thumb tracing those slow, lazy circles against my skin, like he was memorizing the texture, the warmth, the tiny pulse there. "If I stay," he said softly, "you know it won't be for another glass of wine." I felt the corner of my mouth lift. "Then stay for something better." He leaned in slowly, so slowly I could feel the space between us stretch and tighten until it was unbearable, until the first brush of his lips against mine landed like a spark on dry wood. The kiss was soft at first, unhurried, but full of the kind of certainty that made my chest feel warm all over. His other hand came up to the side of my neck, the heat of his palm settling there like it belonged, while his thumb grazed just under my jaw. I let my own hand slide to his side, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing beneath the fitted black t-shirt. The radiator hummed again in the background, but now it sounded almost like a soundtrack to the quiet, steady rhythm we were finding. The kiss deepened, the weight of him shifting toward me on the couch, his knee brushing against mine until we were close enough that every breath seemed to belong to both of us. When he finally pulled back, just far enough to speak, his voice was low and warm. "I'm breaking every rule I've made about guests right now." "Maybe I'm not just any guest," I said, my fingers still resting at his side. He smiled then, really smiled. And it was the kind that made you feel like you just passed some invisible test you didn't even know you were taking. The next kiss wasn't tentative at all. It was deeper, surer, his hand sliding from my neck to my shoulder, down my arm, until his fingers were laced with mine again, pulling me just a little closer, like the idea of space between us no longer made sense. We didn't speak for a while after that. The conversation had shifted into something wordless, trading warmth, learning the shape of each other's breathing, that subtle give and take that feels both brand new and strangely familiar. And in the back of my mind, I knew that whatever I'd expected when I booked this place, a quiet weekend, a little time away, had already been rewritten into something else entirely. Something that was just starting. We didn't move apart after that last kiss. If anything, we sank deeper into the quiet between us, the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath for you. His hand was still warm around mine, but now his other hand rested lightly at my waist, fingers just curling enough to let me know he had no plans to move first. I could feel his eyes on me even before I looked up, steady, searching, but softer now, as though he was letting me see something he didn't show often. "You know," he said quietly, "I almost didn't knock." I told myself it wasn't worth the risk. "What changed your mind?" I asked, my voice low, almost careful because part of me wasn't sure I wanted to hear an answer that would make this feel too fleeting. "You," he said simply, "the way you answered the door, like you weren't surprised to see me, like you'd already been expecting it." I hadn't thought of it that way, but he wasn't wrong. From the moment I saw him in the hallway light, leaning there with that unreadable half smile, it hadn't felt like an intrusion. It had felt like a continuation of something I hadn't realized we'd already started. His thumb brushed along my side, a subtle movement that made my breath hitch. "Tell me to go and I will," he murmured. I shook my head slowly. "Not tonight." The shift after that was so subtle, it might have gone unnoticed if not for the way my pulse picked up, his weight leaning into mine just slightly, the couch cushion dipping under the redistribution, his lips finding mine again with a deeper, more certain pull. This kiss didn't just linger, it anchored. His hand slid upward along my back, pressing me into him until the space between us was nothing but shared heat and the faint rhythm of our breathing. I let my own hands wander now, tracing the line of his arm, the shape of his shoulder, the edge of his jaw. Every touch felt deliberate, like I was mapping him out 1 inch at a time, and every time my fingers shifted, he responded, leaning closer, deepening the kiss, or letting out a quiet hum that made my chest tighten. When he finally pulled back, he stayed close enough that our foreheads brushed. "Your trouble," he said, but the way he smiled made it sound more like an invitation than a warning. I smiled back. "Then you've only got yourself to blame." We stayed there for another long moment, both of us aware that the night was tipping into something neither of us had planned for, but neither of us wanted to stop. And as the radiator's hum filled the background again, I realized the apartment suddenly felt smaller, like the walls had drawn in to make room for just 2 people and whatever this was becoming. He didn't let go of my hand as he stood, giving a gentle tug for me to follow. I rose with him, feeling that small current of anticipation surge again, the kind that made the air between us hum even when neither of us spoke. "Show me the rest of the apartment," he said, though the glint in his eye told me he wasn't here for a tour. I led him toward the bedroom, the soft light from the living room fading behind us, replaced by the warmer amber glow of the bedside lamp I'd left on earlier. He stopped in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame, looking around with the kind of curiosity that wasn't about the furniture at all. "Cozy," he said, his gaze flicking from the bed to me. "I can see why you settled in so quickly." "Wasn't hard to," I replied, meeting his eyes. That was when he stepped inside fully, his presence filling the room in a way that felt heavier, in the best possible way. He came close enough that I could smell him again, that warm, woodsy cologne with just enough spice to make me want to lean in. "You're sure about this?" he asked, his voice lower now, almost a whisper, but steady. I nodded. "I was sure the moment you knocked." That was all the confirmation he needed. His hands came up to frame my face, his thumbs brushing along my cheekbones before his mouth found mine again, this time with an urgency we'd both been holding back. The kiss was deep, unhurried but certain, and as his lips moved against mine, I felt his hands slide down over my shoulders, along my arms, until his fingers laced with mine again, pulling me closer until our chests pressed together. We moved toward the bed without thinking about it, his steps in sync with mine until the backs of my knees brushed the edge of the mattress. He paused just long enough to look at me, to read whatever was in my eyes, before leaning in again. His kiss slower now, but weighted with something that made my chest feel tight. When his hands slid along my sides, it wasn't rushed. Every movement felt deliberate, like he was learning me by touch, taking in each reaction as if cataloging it. My hands mirrored his exploration, finding the heat of his back through the thin fabric of his shirt, the curve of his shoulder, the line of his neck. He pulled back just slightly, his forehead resting against mine. "I wasn't expecting this when I knocked tonight," he said, his breath warm against my skin. "I wasn't either," I admitted, "but now I can't picture the night ending any other way." The smile that crossed his face then wasn't the half smirk from the doorway earlier. It was softer, almost disarming. And then he kissed me again, deeper, his hands pressing into my lower back until I felt every inch of him, solid and certain against me. The radiator's hum faded into nothing. The world outside might as well not have existed. And for that stretch of time, there was no Airbnb listing, no guest and host. There were just two men who'd stumbled into something rare, and neither of them willing to waste a second of it. When we finally broke apart, it wasn't because the spark had gone. It was because we both knew the night was just beginning. The room was still warm, the kind of warmth that clings to the air after the energy is settled but hasn't yet faded. We lay there side by side, the soft amber glow of the lamp, casting shadows across the ceiling, our breathing slowly finding the same rhythm. His arm was draped across my stomach, not heavy, just there, an anchor keeping me in the moment. For a while, neither of us spoke. It wasn't the silence of strangers running out of things to say. It was the silence of people who didn't want to disturb something fragile and new. I stared at the way his hand rested against me, the contrast of his skin against mine, the faint rise and fall with each breath, and I thought about how strange it was that hours ago he'd just been a profile picture on a booking site. He shifted slightly, propping himself up on one elbow so he could look at me. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low and steady. I nodded. "Better than okay." A small smile curved his lips. "I wasn't sure you'd even open the door tonight. I almost talked myself out of it." "What made you knock anyway?" I asked, genuinely curious. He shrugged, though his eyes stayed locked on mine. "Something about you. When we met earlier, I thought, if I don't take this chance, I'll regret it." That landed deeper than I expected, maybe because I knew exactly what he meant. "Guess I'm glad you didn't listen to yourself." He chuckled softly, then lay back down beside me, this time pulling me in closer so my head rested against his shoulder. The steady beat of his heart was there, right under my ear, and I found myself matching my breathing to it without even trying. "I don't usually mix this with guests," he said after a moment, "but I think we can agree this wasn't exactly part of the standard Airbnb experience." I laughed quietly. "Pretty sure they don't list it under amenities." His hand traced slow, idle lines along my arm, and there was something in the gesture, casual, intimate, unhurried, that made me realize we weren't just filling the time until morning. This was him choosing to stay here with me, to stretch this night for as long as it would go. We talked a little then, about where I was from, how long I was staying, the trips he'd taken, the quirks of running a place like this. Every story felt like another small piece clicking into place, making him less a stranger and more someone I could picture knowing outside these four walls. And the more he spoke, the more I knew this night was going to be one of those rare ones you think about long after it's over. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. I woke to the soft gray light of morning spilling through the gap in the curtains, painting the room in that quiet, early hour calm. For a moment, I wasn't sure where I was. Then I felt the warmth at my back, the steady weight of an arm across my waist, and it all came rushing back. He was still asleep, his breath slow and even against my shoulder, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the sheets. I lay there for a while, listening to the sound of the radiator ticking softly in the corner, thinking about how, 24 hours ago, I'd been unpacking my bag in this apartment, with no expectation beyond a few peaceful nights alone. Eventually he stirred, his arm tightening around me in that half-conscious way people do when they're not ready to wake but don't want to let go. "Morning," he murmured, his voice still rough with sleep. "Morning," I said, turning slightly so I could see his face. He smiled, slow and unguarded, and for the first time he looked less like the composed host who'd greeted me yesterday, and more like someone who'd let me see past the surface. "I was hoping you'd still be here," he said. "I wasn't going anywhere," I replied, and I meant it. We stayed in bed a while longer, talking in that lazy way people do when the day hasn't fully started yet, about breakfast plans, about the weather, about nothing and everything at once. Eventually we got up, moving around the apartment together like we'd done it 100 times before. Me making coffee, him rummaging for bread and eggs in the kitchen. When it was finally time for me to get ready to head out for the day, he leaned against the doorway, watching me tie my shoes. "You'll be back tonight?" he asked, and it didn't sound like a question he wanted to play cool. I stood, meeting his eyes. "If you knock again," I said, smiling, "maybe I'll even open the door faster this time." He laughed, stepping forward to kiss me once more, soft, lingering, like he was trying to make it last until the next time. "I think we can arrange that," he said. As I left the apartment, the city felt different somehow, brighter, lighter, like the kind of day that only follows a night where something shifts. And I had the distinct feeling that when I came back, it wouldn't just be to an Airbnb. It would be to him. If you stayed with this story until the end, drop a comment saying, "Not your usual Airbnb," so we know exactly who felt the spark all the way through.